Shakespearean amphitheatre here, and I've just entered stage toilet left. So it's, all the world's a stage, eh? We're all players. Yeah. So where to start on a talk like this today? And I just perhaps ought to outline that the talk tomorrow is going to be an extension of the talk today, where the talk's mainly about earth energies and consciousness today, but we're moving on to the evolution of consciousness and what the prophecies have to say, and what we have to do and what we have to prepare for tomorrow. So today's setting is a little bit in advance of the second one. And I think there's some time for questions at the end if you'd like to do that. The first thing to perhaps I'd like to get you to think about is to think back to a time in your life when you made your very first decision that you yourself made. And it's maybe through choices that you had. It could have been at school, anything along those lines that you actually thought, wow, that really was my first choice, not one that my parents made or anyone else made for me. That was my first choice. And for me, that was to study geology or history. And I got to choose for the first time. And I don't think I regretted that decision because I chose geology. But the point was, I'm not quite sure why. I look back on it and say, why was it that geology fascinated me? What was it that causes us to be interested in certain things? And even throughout that life, we find that we have, well, why am I more interested in this aspect of life or this subject than others? What's making me feel that way? But it's not just an interest, it's an intensive interest that leads to passion. And I wonder, what was it that caused you to have huge passion in the early days? Because for me, that's one of the earliest signs that some message is trying to come through to you. This is your role in life, this is where you're studying, this is where you've got to go. And from that point onwards, if we follow that path, we begin to attract into us what we're expecting to learn and pick up and do in our lives. And this interest, this intensity, became interesting for me when I was a geologist. And I'll explain why, because I was working 7,000 feet underground in the gold mines. And I would be really surprised any of you who's been down underground 7,000 feet in a gold mine, but there are times when you can walk for an hour in the darkness towards the working end of the mine. If you're lucky, you can catch a bike because it's all on rails. But the times when you're walking, and can be totally just with the 2 or 3 people who you have working with you, you can be walking in silence, in darkness. Yes, you've got a light. But I always remember those hours of walking, both an hour to the end and an hour back again, in a sauna condition because it's really hot. The intensity of visualization was phenomenal. It was nothing like on the surface. If I wanted to think about something, 7,000 feet underground, it was like, vroom, I was really living it. Amazing visualization. The intensity was quite incredible, and it stayed with me for quite some time, and I wondered why that was. And back in the 1990s, I was researching consciousness because I'd come across Aikido and Chi energy and Ki energy, and I'd started looking at Hamish Miller's work with earth energies, and I was beginning to think maybe this Chi or Ki energy is something to do with gravity. And at that point I was putting my thoughts together. I thought, well, what I really need to do is I need to speak to an astronaut, which I don't know if you've ever tried to do something like that. and back in the 90s there weren't too many, though. It was one British woman, Helen Sharman, I think, and so I put my mind to it for about a week, thinking, how am I going to speak to an astronaut? I just wanted some questions asked. And one of the things that is a strange thing and a very fortunate thing in my life is that I've had incredible synchronicities. It's been very fortunate because it's the kind of way that nature has, or the universe has, of giving you the right information at the right time. But you need to explore synchronicities. It just doesn't happen. You need to have a way of exploring the first and second day causal connecting event. And there's a lady in the office that was a secretary of a friend of mine, and she was knowing that I was writing a book, and she said to me halfway through, she said, "I'm writing a book." I said, "That's interesting. What are you writing about?" She says, "Oh, I'm writing about my family." So explore, okay, as you do, as you should do. What about your family? I said. She said. I said to her, and she said, "Oh, I've got some interesting people in my family." Okay, and I probed a bit further, as you do, and she said, "Well, for instance, my sister's married to an astronaut." Not only an astronaut, but a chap called William Thornton, who'd been up in the space shuttle twice, and he was a medically trained doctor. And I said, "Well, do you think you might answer some questions?" And of the answers he very kindly gave me, the one thing that stood out was that his dreams in space were incredibly intense, much more so than when he was on Earth. And I hadn't heard that from anybody else. But I do know dreams, well, you probably do as well, are incredibly powerful. The military are always interested in people's dreams, and that's another tangent I won't go into just now. But this intensity of dreams was in direct contrast with the intensity of visualization that I was coming up and finding at 7,000 feet underground. At the time, I thought it might be connected to gravity, with the center of the Earth being where there was more gravity, and up in space where there's almost zero gravity. I thought there was a difference between the subconscious mind when we're asleep and the conscious mind when we're awake. And this, I've completely revised my ideas on gravity, by the way, so that wasn't actually the case. There's more of a difference in the density of a background medium, where you have a lot more density in the background medium in the center of the Earth as opposed to up in space. And the reason that's going to become important, because the background medium we now know is the seat of the universal consciousness. But at the time, and looking back at it, I was beginning to recognize the importance of intensity when it comes to working with the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And it wasn't immediately apparent until I'd started dowsing. Actually, when I first started dowsing was for water in Africa, for the farmers, and that was kind of nice, because you learn about a feedback mechanism there. When you douse for water, you just get a rod moving. It doesn't mean anything. You actually have to put a drill down into the ground and hit the water to know whether you've actually dowsed for water. And that feedback mechanism has absolutely held me in good stead for mapping these energy lines. If you've got a rod here, you've got an invisible line. How can you prove that? You need to find other ways of getting information on proving that what you're actually picking up is actually true. Because I can tell you now, it's very easy to make it up. In fact, when you do my dowsing courses, I teach you how to make it up. You need to know when you're making it up, because that helps you differentiate when you know you're not making it up. It gets to the point, actually, where if you're following a straight line and it's going into a building, if you walk round the other side, you know where the line's going to come out. The other side of the building? Well, as soon as you think you know where it's going to come out the other side, you're making it up, or you're at the danger of making it up. So you have to go round to the other side of the building, and you have to actually say, well, this line could have been bending slightly away from the direction or towards me. So now I'm in this uncertain position. I don't know quite where the line is going to be this side of the building. And this point of uncertainty begun to be really important when looking at getting into the right frame of mind for dowsing. And what I loved about teaching dowsing, and still do today, is that it becomes a precursor to so many other things. We start by asking the question, I ought to get a rod out really, shouldn't I? Standing here with my fingers. People think, what on earth is he doing like this, you know? Let me see if I got one earlier here. As I said, you can make it up. There's one just there, and there's another one just there. You can make it up. There's another line coming over just here, and my hand didn't even move. So you can make this stuff up, and it's really easy to make it up. So how do I stop that? Well, the trick actually is you ask the question when you're in a focused state. You're actually focusing on the question, your attention's on that, and then you switch into your aware state. That aware state is mushin, no mind, don't care, just tell me the truth. I get to have to be so uncertain that I know that my own individual consciousness mind and my conscious mind isn't affecting my aware state. And you begin to realize that this is becoming more like a communication between your conscious mind in a focused state, switching to the aware state and the subconscious mind. And after a while you begin to recognize actually if you're going to do this well, it's all about intensity. So this intensely aware state that you need to get into in order to receive information from the subconscious. We're talking about having an intense visual acuity, an intense kinesthetic ability, and an aware, intensely aware auditory feeling. So you hear no one thing, you see no one thing, you feel no one thing, you hear and feel and see everything. That's quite tricky to get to that totally. But the key is the intensity. Just like the intensity to get to the subconscious showed up in dreams when you're in your subconscious mind in space. And when you're underground, when you get back out of that aware state and you move back to the focused state again, you are totally focused visually, kinesthetically and auditorily. And at that point you can take all the information you've got from the subconscious and assimilate it and reformulate questions, and then you switch back to the aware state to get the answers. This cross between conscious mind and subconscious mind was a huge opening to me to understand this is now very close to mediumship. And we begin to experience this with dowsing because you'd start asking the question and before you knew it, you got a response. It goes on from that to you begin to ask the question, and if anyone who's a medium who's done channeling will know, whoa, where did that thought come from? Where did that symbol suddenly come from? You know, I didn't think that. Where did that thought come from? And then you're beginning to realize actually you're opening up this mediumship between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. And that is where you get taken from dowsing earth energy lines through to all the other possible skills like mediumship, healing, and all the things that are skilled when we work with these energies. And just the connection here that I made next was when I'd been studying Steiner. And I came across Steiner through some major synchronicity down in South Africa as well, being introduced to him by two different people on the same weekend at a point in my life when I needed it. Steiner talks about the three beasts in the abyss and the three fires that we need. And the reason for mentioning this is because this abyss he's talking about is the gulf between our physical world and our world of spirit. It's when we're in our conscious mind moving across to our subconscious mind. And it's the same thing with regards to these three beasts of doubt and various other things. But the fires you need to have the truth. You need to know the truth or want to know the truth. You need to have courage to go there. It's like thinking of an incubatory journey, if you like, going from this world over to the other world, moving over to the subconscious realms. And you've got to have that fire of intent, these three fires, to be able to cross from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. And this is exactly what you're finding with dowsing, is that you have to have that absolute desire for the truth. You set the intent, show me the edge of this line. Get to the point where you're completely uncertain. So you haven't personally, individually got any clue or any input. And I get to the point where I really don't care anymore. Just show me the damn line. Okay? That's all I want to know. I just want to know the truth. And then you look for the feedback, and you get the response, and you could be doing it remotely, and you're walking along, you get this, and every now and again you drill down into a closer and closer environment. Or for instance, when I started dowsing, I would walk all around Wiltshire. I was mapping the whole area. It took me 6 years, doing about half an hour to 3/4 of an hour every day. After I came back from work, I'd take a detour and follow the lines. You'd follow these lines, and every now and again they'd come together in the middle of a field or something like that, and you'd look and wonder where these things were, and think, oh my goodness, there's a buried sarsen underneath the grass here. I found 6 or 7 stone circles in Wiltshire which weren't on the map, just by following these lines. So that was a nice sort of feedback. When you do remote dowsing, again, don't care, just show me where the lines are, show me where the node is, please, just do it quickly. And then you start drilling in and begin to find wonderful things. Like just literally 2 days ago I was doing one in Texas, and sorry, I didn't fly there, this is remotely, sorry. Yes. It's not that wealthy game. It looked like they was heading for this church, and there's lots of churches, and they're often in churches, but I didn't know why this particular church, and as soon as I'm scrolling in, I'm thinking, that's strange, they've got a labyrinth outside this church. So you really realise, you look on the website, it's a spiritualist church, and they do all their sort of their things, and so that's where the node was. Great, nice and easy. But, so that was a sacred site search that I do for people. I mean, what's going to be interesting now is whether they know about the church or not, and the labyrinth. So the reason for mentioning this is this whole journey that we're going from the conscious mind here to the subconscious mind, from focus to awareness, this crossing of the abyss. When you cross the abyss, we are challenged. We are purposely challenged. We are given the wrong answers at times just to challenge us. And if you really want to have a good close look at how people can be challenged, have a look at the Red Book, Jung's Red Book. He finished it much earlier in the 19th century. It wasn't published until 2009. Incredible pictures in it. And the digest version, he explains exactly how he went through this inner visualization journeys from about 1913 to 1919. And he drew these incredible pictures. They're absolutely amazing, but they are about a journey, an incubatory journey. Every night he would go upstairs and lie down in his bed and start inner visualizing, and it would just take him into a world where he met characters like the spirit of the depths, the spirit of our times, his soul, the serpent. And these were characters, he met Elijah, Salome from the Bible, that completely changed his life. From being an Orthodox Christian, he became a Gnostic towards the end of his life. And it was because he was challenged throughout each section of this journey across the abyss. It was the same thing. It's like a water journey, just like Goethe's fairy tale, from the land of the senses, which is our world, across to the land of the spirit. You cross the river, like the ferryman crossing over the river Styx with Charon in the old mythology tales. So we have this concept of the journey across to the other world, which is filled with challenges. And the challenges, when we realize what it's all about, is it's about our weaknesses. Not what we think our strengths and weaknesses are, it's what our real weaknesses are that we have to face and endure. So why am I going down this stairway? I should be talking about earth energy lines. Well, it's the same thing when you start working with the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. We are going to be challenged. When we get to the prophecies section and the evolution of consciousness, and I'll touch on it briefly now, the veils between all the worlds will be coming down. The worlds of spirit and the worlds of the senses are coming together. That's happening. It's happening in our perceptions, in our minds. Nothing really is changing in the world, but our perceptions are going to be changing it. We are in the middle of mankind's movement through this abyss. So just like an individual goes on an incubatory journey and gets challenged by the spirit of the depths and the spirit of the time, or the guardian of the threshold, as Steiner talks about, this huge giant, we are going to go through these challenges. Heck, we are going through these challenges now for one reason, preparing ourselves for what's to come. We can't have the weaknesses. And we don't know what they are. We may think we're what we are, but we find that out when we do these, when we start taking this route. So how do we do that? And how the heck does it fit with energy lines? Well, when you don't know what's going on as a scientist, you do need to start just making observations. So that's what started me off with just mapping all the lines in North Wiltshire. We used to live in Chippenham at the time. I had to find out what on earth was going on. And at that point, yeah, mistakes were made, challenges were went through. I won't go into those, but it was definitely feeling like I was being put through the abyss in that journey. But what resulted was an understanding that there's a load of energy lines. They run in pairs all over the place, and it's these lines are not static. They actually shift from side to side, but they don't shift at the nodes. So it's just like a guitar, you have it fixed at one point, and at the other point the string vibrates backwards and forwards. That's the same with these energy lines. So you might have a 30-meter wide line, it goes 10 meters one way, 10 meters the other way, and it has a very steady frequency. Not on all these lines have the same frequency. There are groups of them with different frequencies. So you just keep measuring them, and you begin to think, well, okay, so some have got 12-hour frequencies, some have 24-hour frequencies, and you keep doing that until you begin to see some patterns in what's going on. That led us to recognizing that 4 times a year, all of these lines were moving in harmony, side to side. It lasted for about half a day. And it's always the day before the solstice and the equinoxes, which kind of confused me. Well, I thought, why is it not on the solstices and equinoxes? It took a while, but eventually the universe found a way of giving me the answer. It was to do with the ancient Hebrew holy days, the Tekufa, which was the day before the first cycle of the sun, the first day of the new cycle of the sun. And the solstice and the equinoxes is always the first day of the new cycle of the sun. So the day before is the last day, and that's when the holy day was. And St. John's Day, for instance, for the summer solstice, was the celebration the day afterwards. So I'm going along just measuring these lines, no problems at all, finding nodes, beginning to see what's happening. And then these lines start doing something different. I was actually trying to work out why these lines were doing this. Does anyone know why these lines move, by the way? If you haven't heard my ideas from the center of the Earth expanding and contracting. Okay, right. So you've got these lines, let's say 2 lines like this. They don't all move one way and all move like that. There's an expansion outwards and back. And you could have another one here. There's an expansion and contraction of these lines moving, all different ways. If you think about a balloon and you draw a triangle with a black line on it, a black indelible marker on a triangle, and you just inflate the balloon, the triangle gets bigger, deflate the balloon, and the triangle gets smaller. That's the kind of what it looks like on the surface, these lines moving. What we think is happening is that the inner core of the Earth, which is iron and nickel, is a particularly good transducer. Now, a transducer converts one form of energy into another. For instance, the electromagnetic energy, which is in the liquid outer core, which produces the Earth's magnetic field, that's putting huge amounts of electricity into the inner core, which is being transduced into spherical waves of vibration, emanating out to the surface and back off like standing waves until it gets to the surface, and spherical standing waves of sound, well, subaudible sound, they have the high pressure zones and low pressure zones. So if you've got microphones here, they take little transducers in there. The transducers convert the sound energy into electrical energy, and in the speakers it takes the electrical energy and converts it back to sound energy. So we have an inner core which is like a loudspeaker, except we can't hear it. They're just waves of vibrations. And vibrations, for me, are very much connected to the universal consciousness through a wonderful friend of mine who's passed now, Ron Pearson, who came up with a new theory on the creation of the universe, which showed how intelligence must reside on a subquantum level, and it uses waves and vibrations at that level to create the particles like electrons on the larger quantum levels. So it has the intelligence to create matter as and where it wants, on whatever frequency it wants. So we have all these worlds, not on lots of dimensions, that's just all rubbish. We've been thrown a curveball by physics. Relativity theory has been a massive misdirection imposed on mankind to stop us investigating the ether and the background to technology. It's to stop us looking at things like survival after death, intelligence behind the universe. They don't want you knowing all this. So when they talk about multiple dimensions, multiple universes, this is just people paid to troll us. They only need those multiple dimensions because they can't fit it with quantum theory. Relativity theory won't fit with quantum theory unless you have these multiple dimensions. You don't need them. You don't need relativity. You just need an idea that actually we all have different frequencies of matter. Just like we can't hear everything because we can only hear within a certain range. We can't see everything because we can only see within a certain range. It's the same with feeling. We can only feel within a certain range. All that's going to change though. We're going to start feeling and seeing and hearing a lot more, because that's what the veils are coming down. So all these other worlds, they exist on different frequencies of matter in the same area as we are. Right now, the world of our ancestors, the angels, the demons. They're all beings with different frequencies that exist. I mean, cats can see them. Probably dogs can hear them. Okay? A few people that I know are able to pick these things up. Steiner himself could see a lot of these nature spirits and things. That too is going to become a problem for people. I already have one or two people now who've got huge mental illnesses that I've come across. I was working in one of the discussion groups with a lady who's a psychology professor in psychiatry in California, and she's telling me about the mental problems some of her patients have because of what they're seeing. I mean, if you imagine walking down the street and seeing a knight in shining armor charging past you, okay? You think you might be going mad. But do you know who saw that? Who wrote that? Carl Jung. He saw that. He was already making that boundary, breaking through the boundaries of seeing and feeling and hearing other things. This is going to be happening more and more to us. I'll come more into that tomorrow. But coming back to the earth energies and the matter frequencies and the frequencies of these energy lines, what's been going on is that we are picking up different vibrations coming from the inner core. Because not only is it transducer, it's a mechanical filter. What that means is it produces certain groups of vibrations and then nothing. And the energy lines, we've got the same thing. We have 24-hour frequency lines. That's 12 hours. Takes 12 hours to go one way, 12 hours to go the other way. Some are 36 hours. They take 18 hours to go this way and 18 hours to go that way. The big lines, the emperor dragons, take 48 hours. 24 hours to go one way, 24 hours to go the other way. Except for one emperor dragon, the one that came last. I'll mention that a bit more later, but it's the one that ran through America. And that's a 72-hour frequency. So there are different frequencies, there are gaps. There's nothing at 25, 26, 27, 28 hours. It doesn't happen. We have ones at 16 hours. So what's going on? Well, the mechanical filter effect is producing all these groups of lines and nothing in between. And that's what we're picking up with the energies. We actually can measure these different frequencies by going back every hour and checking where they are, getting somebody else to check our work. Is this true? Is this what I'm picking up? And you begin to realize, yes, there's a side-to-side movement. So we're getting to a point where things are beginning to change. In 2017, how are we doing for time, by the way? I'm in danger of talking all day if I don't ask.
Just started.
Yeah, right. Great, thank you. These, I mentioned about the emperor dragons first and how we first came across them. The biggest lines that we knew about in this country for a long time were the ones found by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, and you'll know about them. They follow the St Michael alignments from Cornwall all the way across up to East Anglia. And the well-known St Michael and St Mary lines follow this alignment. It turns out there are quite a few more alignments like this in the UK. There's 12 or 13 of them. And where they cross over, you get some really interesting places. You'll know the one that Hamish found just down from him was at St Michael's Mount, because it crosses the Apollo-Athena line. We call that now a fourth order node. It's just not very big because you can't get many people around it, because it's a middle of a sort of island which is on a promontory. But there are other great fourth order nodes. Royston Cave is one, and a few others which I won't mention now. But these are the biggest type 4 lines that we get in this country. I think it was around about 2013, 14. Ron and I were given information by a French medium called Brigitte Rix, and she'd been channeling some information for Ron, and she'd also introduced us to the Seth materials. Some of you probably know the book by Jane Roberts, Seth Speaks, The True Nature of Reality. She knew about my work and Ron's work, and she wanted to draw our attention to something called absolute coordinate points. And there were even expeditions to try and find these 4 absolute coordinate points that Seth had talked about. And these were places of immense power, absolutely incredible power. Then, apart from the 4 absolute points, there were main coordinate points, which were also extraordinary places of power. And then there were lots of sub-coordinate points, which were all over the place. So people were looking for these absolute coordination points for ages. And when I read about them, it was just so obvious these were the nodes. But the strange thing at that time was that this was like, how come there's only 4? How could you have 4 when you need lines crossing over? If you had 2 major lines, you'd have 2 crossing points. If you had 3 major lines, you'd have 6 crossing points, or they'd all cross over at 2 points. So how do you get 4? And it took us a while to realize that actually he was talking about 4 that were accessible. The other 2 were in the oceans. But the real breakthrough moment was at the same time that Brigitte was mentioning this. I have a friend of mine, Carol Everett, who used to live in Crediton, and she's an amazing healer, and her healing sanctuary was in her home, and it actually was right on the Mary line. I know, I used to go there, I've dowsed it. And they moved to Spain, and not long after she'd moved over there, she'd messaged me and said, Rory, she says, I found this place in the mountains. She said, it's off the scale, energy-wise. And I said, what? You've just lived on the Mary line and you're telling me this is off the scale. So, and we've since been there. In fact, two ladies and gentlemen, David and Bear, who you'll come later, have been there with us, so that they'll vouch for this. The power there has been absolutely phenomenal. But it allowed us to then map these emperor dragons, and we found them running north through Spain up through France. I've got people now mapping them in Belgium and in Denmark. People have just come forward and they're now mapping them in Sweden with the Swedish Dowsers group looking at that. We mapped them across Spain, across Europe, and found that these 3 dragons, and we've mapped them all around the world. It took about 18 months. And we've had people go onto these lines in different places. A lovely chap, David, I met completely by accident, as you do on the solstice in the rain at the top of Silbury Hill. On a Monday afternoon in a huge rain. Anyway, David lives over in Venice Beach in California, and he's been to the dragons now just up the coast near Monterey, and other people have been picking them up all over the world. But this was the 3 dragons, 3 emperor dragons. Everything changed in 2017, and I forget now who gave me the call, but said, Rory, what's going on with the lines? And I checked them, and suddenly everything had doubled in width, which is a bit surprising. Literally everything doubled. Now I have to be mindful here is that I have a friend of mine, Phil. I taught him to dowse years and years ago, and everything he dowses at twice the width I do. So if I have a 5-pace wide line, he dowses it at 10 paces. If I have a 30-pace wide line, he dowses at 60 paces. It's just the way he is. All right? The center's the same, the frequency's the same. I just sort of put it, the guy is more sensitive than me, which is believable, I can tell you. So you've got already a disconnect. Most people have the similar sort of widths, but was it that something happened to us that we're now dowsing it twice the width, or were the lines themselves always that width, and now we're picking them up at a wider width? So we don't quite know whether it's our own perceptions or the lines actually physically dowsed in the width and got wider. But we did more of other investigations, and another friend of mine, Tim, who also came to Spain a long time ago with us in 2012. For that story's in my book Grail Bound. But we worked out that another emperor dragon had joined the world. And this began to start looking at, well, how do the emperor dragons and how do these lines come about? What's the source of the energy? And if you think of the model of the hypothesis of the inner core pulsing like a beating heart of the earth, it's got to have source energy constantly coming in. Now, we knew we had source energy from the electromagnetics from the earth, so we had to have another form of source energy, probably from the sun and probably from nearby galaxies. And the most sensible thing was this cosmic energy. And the cosmic energy, when it hits the atmosphere, it converts to gamma ray radiation, which is the big no one's talking about in the world right now, and neutrinos. Neutrinos are high energy, almost massless particles that go straight through the Earth. They pick them up at the other end in Antarctica over these huge observation stations like Ice Cube. They've got all these holes going to the bottom of the ice, and they can see how these neutrinos are deflected slightly on their passage through the Earth. And you can tell the structure of the Earth. They call it acoustic tomography. And so you can pick up these neutrinos, and if they're bouncing slightly off of the inner core, that means energy is being given to the inner core. That means it's transduced. That means we get more projections from the inner core to the surface. So we think that the sun's cosmic energy is increasing the width of the lines, but the galactic energies, somehow we had more galactic energy coming through, cosmic energy. A few of you are already ahead of the game. You probably know what I'm going to say next. And you probably follow Ben Davison from Suspicious Observers, but he's definitely on the case when it comes to what's going on in the cosmos and space weather and space weather news. And what he'd picked up was the 12,000-year cycle that was the solar system going through something called the galactic current sheet. Now, I need to just explain that a little bit. The sun, our sun, has a north pole and a south pole. Every 11 years it switches. The north goes to the south goes to the north. The way it does that is the north pole moves together to meet the south pole as the magnetic field drops. As they come together, an opposite pole, the other side of the sun, appears and it continues. So that's the mechanism for pole switches, magnetic reversals. It happens on the Earth roughly every 200,000 to 300,000 years. And when it does, the magnetic field drops. And that's what's been happening now. Not only has the magnetic field of our Earth been dropping, but the North Pole, magnetic North Pole, is now heading towards Russia. It used to be over in Canada. The magnetic South Pole has now left Antarctica. This should be front page news everywhere. But so what? Well, yeah, but the news and all of that, we don't even bother with that anymore. We have to find our own truths. So we've got a decreasing magnetic field. The magnetic fields in space, interstellar magnetic fields, this is the thing that stops cosmic energy getting through and causing all the benefits and the harm on the Earth. And I say benefits and harm because, as Tesla will talk about, there's both action and reaction. You get good things from cosmic energy. They are highly mutational, but they can kill cells. There are big evolutionary time periods in our past when we've had increases in cosmic energy. And you can tell that from isotope levels of beryllium-14 in Greenland ice cores. So we know the times of evolutionary periods in our past are linked to larger amounts of cosmic energy. We're getting that right now. We're going through an evolutionary process because we're getting more cosmic energy. It's the tools that the universal consciousness does to make these changes. But this 12,000-year cycle is when our solar system passes through something called the galactic current sheet. This galactic current sheet is very similar to the sun's current sheet. This is a sort of wavy electric sheet that goes around the sun. It's like a spiral sheet. It doesn't take us long to go through. The Earth passes through it in 2 minutes. We go through it every 8 to 10 days. It's up and down like this every 8 to 10 days, whether we're near the apex or the middle. Every time it goes through the current sheet, we get a jolt of electricity that hits our Earth. It's measurable. We pick it up. It's like going straight into the inner core of our Earth. It whacks the inner core like another bell. And suddenly, for 2 days, all the type 3 lines go into harmony. And then they go out of sync for the next 8 to 10 days, until we get hit by the bell again, and suddenly the type 2s are in harmony for 2 days. So there's a direct connection between the heliospheric current sheet and the energy lines. And it's highly likely that since we live in an electric universe, we don't have relativity theory, that this current sheet from the galaxy is similar to the sun's current sheet. But this time, the solar system isn't going to take 8 minutes to go through it. It's going to take 200 years. And we're going to get zapped with electricity, just like the sun does. And in fact, we just need to know when we're entering this current sheet. And one of the reasons we get these magnetic reversals is the wave front of the current sheet coming towards our solar system, which is affecting loads of planets on the way. That is already affecting the magnetism of the Earth. That's why our magnetic fields are lowering. So we're going through all this. What we think now is in 2017, when these energies started doubling in width, is that there's a lot more energy coming through to the inner core, which means a lot more cosmic energy. When you start looking at the bands within these energy lines, because energy lines have got 9 bands. The central band is related to the sun. That's the central band, that's what caused the widening of these lines. It's the central band that widened massively. The others didn't really widen that much. So when you start looking at the effects of the current sheet, it's destabilizing Saturn, Mars, whole things on the planets. And for instance, the storms on Saturn came 10 years earlier than the normal 30-year storms. Everything is being affected. And it has this cyclic effect. Every 12,000 years we go through this galactic current sheet, there are effects on Earth. The question is, how big are they? What are they going to be like? What must we do? And that we'll cover tomorrow a bit, because it's about how it affects our consciousness and what we can expect from it. So apart from just the first one that came in 2017, the others came in 2018. And so we now have 6 emperor dragons, and with 6 emperor dragons there's a lot more crosses where the nodes are, and finding the nodes became more and more important because of the connection with the universal consciousness and what could happen at these nodes, and what we were finding out with regards to the prophecies, and how if we really want to know what's going on, if we want to connect with the subconscious, we need to do it at sites that allow us to slip into that aware zone much more easily. So meditating on these sacred sites where there are strong energy lines, completely surrendering to what we're told, completely surrendering to crossing this abyss with all the challenges that we have, so that we're going to be hardened up the way we need to be hardened up. We're going to be given the knowledge we need to be given. It's not us teaching us. It's the energies teaching us. This is serpent wisdom. This is what we have to find out about. We've got to lose the ego. We've got to completely surrender. Everything the ancients have been telling us, even the modern masters that Jung has gone through, Goethe and Steiner, they're telling us the same thing. And even Steiner knew about these energy lines and the nodes. It's just that his whole way of thinking has been massively corrupted by the anthroposophists and the movement who've Christianized it, trying to avoid all information about our possible awakening. So the route now is finding where these nodes are and just allowing people to know that, so that they can actually come together and be taught what they need to know. And they'll be finding out what they need to know for where they are locally, and they'll be connecting up with people in synchronistic ways because of that. Because as soon as you do connect around these sites and just ask for some kind of guidance and help, all kinds of crazy stuff starts happening. So that's why I look for sacred sites for people. I do sacred site searches. I find it absolutely fascinating still today. What I discover is just amazing. For me it is. I mean, probably bore the pants off everybody else. But I love the land. I'm a geologist. I love mapping things. I love rocks. It's just, I can't explain that. And I come back to the beginning of my talk, what my passion was. Well, I made that decision to study geology. I didn't know why. I just knew that was more interesting than history. And I began to find, actually, this is a lot cooler than history. I kind of like history now, but the point was that discovering your passion and following it, sometimes you don't have to have a reason. You just have to do it. And I'm very, very blessed to be able to finally be able to do something which I'm passionate about, and which is now linked to just some immense people in the past that I've come across, and I study that now in discussion groups, and they're something which are going to be available hopefully by the end of the year, where we'll be taking people through their own groups. They'll be in groups where they can actually absorb this information. Because one of the things we have to do is prepare. And if I come back to dowsing just very briefly, when you ask for a response, in dowsing it's pretty simple. No doesn't happen, yes is straight. That's a simple yes-no answer. A nice closed question, is there a line here, yes or no? But you can take that to much greater levels. And I have a friend of mine, Chris Robinson, who's a dream detective, a lovely guy, who has preset over 1,000 symbols. Presetting symbols in your conscious mind so your subconscious can talk to you with those symbols is an important aspect of this game. It's essentially, when we start dowsing, we use hypnosis to connect with water or energy, so that we are setting ourselves up with a preset symbolism. I liken it to Morse code. When someone on the other side is proficient at Morse code in French, and you're proficient at Morse code in English, okay? You've got to learn French in order for that person to not only understand what you're saying, but so you can understand what they're saying. So we have to prepare by learning French, so that the French person on the other side can understand these dots and dashes. So that is presetting. And he preset over 1,000 symbols. And he did it by driving up and parking his van and sleeping on these energy lines all around Britain. And he got given all this information. He's been working for MI5, MI6 and the American Secret Services, and does amazing things. Well, I won't go into that, but we can do the same, but we have to learn what we've been taught. So, to give you an answer, if we're faced with an 18-foot giant, we're not freaking out. We can say, all right, mate, good, yeah, carry on. Because unless we are able to cope with that, we're not going to be able to cope with everything else. And if you think giants are crazy, well, there are over 37 mentioned in the Bible. 37 races of giants. There definitely were giants in our past. I'd kind of like to see one again. Hope I can just say hi, mate. But that's part of what we've got to prepare for, and I think this is what's coming. And probably I've done enough talking, but maybe you've got some questions for me. So, yeah.
What's your favourite node that you've been to?
It used to be the Sanctuary in Avebury, but for me now, the favourite one's Oliver's Castle. I've been going there for over 22 years. When I lived in Devon, I was going up there, and it's got a very special place for me. We've been there through all weathers, and last time we were there, we had 150 people there for over 2 hours, and we've had some just amazing things happen there, and not just on the solstices and equinoxes. I'll give you an example. There's a meditation group that I took to Spain, David, beer, again. And we spent time on the first order node down there, and we still meditate every Wednesday evenings. But we took a chance to go to Oliver's Castle for some experimenting to try and work, because the big game right now is we're moving from individual consciousness to group consciousness. That's what Steiner's talking about. This whole thing is preparing us for that. So we need to know how to be doing group meditation a lot better. I mean, like, we are so bad at it right now. It's just, we haven't even got the questions to ask. That's how bad we're at it. We've got to find the questions to get the answers. But we were doing some work trying to learn some answers, and we had this lovely experience, and you'll remember it with the crow. Yeah. We were exploring the crystalline grid, again from Jung's work with Elijah. In fact, it was the elemental pretending to be Elijah, telling him to step over to the crystal and to bathe himself into the light. I mean, you couldn't believe it with Jung until you get there. But we were there, and every time any of us said the word crystal, this crow behind us would crow. It just, every time, it didn't matter who said it. And eventually I just turned around and said, crystal, and croaked again. It was just one of those beautiful moments up there and there were others. So for me, it's Oliver's Castle, yeah.
So what do you think the purpose of the Emperor Dragon lines are?
If you think, they're very different, the Emperor Dragons. That's very strange. They're not like normal lines. When you try and bring them together, they repel each other. You can't move them on your own. You have to have a group of people to move those lines. So you can't repair nodes with Emperor Dragons unless you've got several people all with the same intent to do that. But if you look at what Seth talks about, these absolute coordinate points, these are not just the places of the highest power, they're the only places which reach the highest realms. The other thing about these Emperor Dragons, they go right round the world, crossing over all the lines, but they very rarely node with any other lines. There's just a few places that they will connect with the Type 4 lines, like Lourdes and other, they're great places, but there aren't many of them. So where they connect at these nodes, that seems to me the only place you can connect to the highest realms. And I should rephrase that. If you could do it, and I can't. Okay. It's like, and I'm talking about someone who can just meditate on a first order node and get instant connection with the highest representatives of the worlds of spirit. I'm sure there are people who can do that in the world. I know of one or two. I haven't met them, but I suspect they could probably do that. But that for me is what see, these nodes, they're learning centers. So I think these are places we have to go. For the big plan for the Sacred Network site in the future is that when we've got over 1 million members, we can raise money to develop these sites, the really big ones in Spain and America, to become pilgrimage centers. So we only need to go there once or twice. You know, forgive me for dragging you in again, David and Beer, but the node in Spain, we've only been there with you as a group once, and yet that same power can be felt when we connect up again. You don't need to be on these sites all the time. It's in Murcia, in southeast Spain.
So Rory, if you were to get people to do one thing, or what would you encourage people to do as something they can do practically at the moment?
The very first thing is to get to a sacred site. Find your way there. Some of them are quite tricky to find. And spend time there individually or with groups, and do so on the solstice or equinoxes, and join the groups that are doing that, and just surrender to what's being given to you at that point, and just start again. Chuck out everything you think you know right. Jung was tested continually for 3 things. He was failing all the time. His weaknesses were his forethinking, that's his assumptions. He kept making assumptions about certain things. He kept thinking serpents were evil. It was massively holding him back. And he kept requiring this concept of opposites, which, if you read my newsletters, this version of duality, I think, has been completely misappropriated by the Christians in the past, who wanted to create divisiveness amongst us. duality for me was two aspects of the same thing, not opposites. But Jung needed his theory of opposites for his whole new theory of archetypes that he was developing for psychoanalysis. And he was constantly tested on this idea of, to the end, he ended turning back to the snake who was challenging him all the time. He says, "I can see what you mean, but I'm bored by it." That was his words back to the snake. So that's a get to the sacred, get to these sites, and find out where they are. I mean, you've got a few around here. So
where are they? We've got a meditation group that meets locally, and it'd be great to know where. Oliver's Castle's a bit away from here. Where is the closest fourth order node?
Stanton Drew's not on it's a good place to go, but the nearest is Glastonbury, Barramump, Trowbridge. There's a church there. So, but Barramump is a good place for it.
And how is the tour for the lines on the tour? Is that where would you meet and meditate on the tour?
Oh, I get into hot water here all the time.
Okay, good.
The node is under the tower now in the tour. If you look at the Sun and the Serpent group, you'll find that the node was originally just a bit down the hill. Back in 2012, though, there was another Type 4 line that runs from the Longstones and the Isle of Wight through Knowlton Castle's one in Dorset. That's a nice place for you to go. That's in a henge. That's a lovely place, and that's not too far from here. It runs through Knowlton Castle, goes through Glastonbury Tor, up through Wales, and on to a lovely stone circle called Tuhomey, I think it is, in the middle of Ireland. But that's a strong alignment that runs down to Troyes in France. Troyes is where Chrétien de Troyes is coming from. It's where the Templars were formed. And there's a church there called the St. Madeleine Church, which is actually on the Emperor Dragon. And that's the same one that runs up through Glastonbury and the Isle of Wight. So but having found the other pair of Type 4 alignment running through Glastonbury, that whole thing was repaired by a group of people, and the node was put up the top. Yeah. Sorry.
Any in the South Pacific?
Are there any in the South Pacific?
Any recent discoveries in the South Pacific?
Whereabouts?
No, really.
Well, there's a very powerful one in South Island in New Zealand. If you read about Hamish's book and Barry Brailsford's book, In Search of the Southern Serpent, there's a place called Castle Hill, near Castle Rocks. There's a marae there, which he talks about, and I know because I've spoken to Barr about this. That is a repaired first order note. That's an exceptionally powerful place. If you want a more recent one, a nice little story, which got my wife and I a nice trip to California a couple of years ago. This couple rang up, a lovely couple. They lived over in Carlsbad at the time, and they wanted me to come and teach them how to train to dowse and things like that, which was kind of nice to be flown over there to teach them for a week. But what cemented it was that I'd looked at their website just prior to the call, and I noticed they were running treats in Kauai, on one of the Hawaiian Islands. And I know literally about 3 weeks before that the last Emperor Dragon had just arrived, and we plotted it running through the tip of Kauai and it going through a place called the Wet Cave Blue Room, and that just looked so appropriate. And so in our first phone call, I was telling him, I said, you know, you're running another retreat in Kauai. He says, yes, we've just been there. I said, well, if you go back there again, I said, you've got to go to the Wet Cave Blue Room, because that is where the Emperor Dragon now runs. He says, we've just been there. All sorts of things kicked off 2 weeks ago. So they saw lights flashing in the sky. They were in the room when the Emperor Dragon arrived. And that what they told me, what happened at that point was freaky. So they very kindly paid for us to go over there for 2 weeks, which is nice. Lovely couple. They've got about 50,000 members in their group all around the world, and they're doing the same thing, getting people onto sites, learning about group meditation. Richard?
So the other side, they have to like, it's part of their nature.
Yeah.
So what happens? Are they able to cross the void? And if they try, what would happen?
Well, they're playing devil's advocate for us. This is the sad thing. They're people that have to be sold. We have to look at them as people that we've got to try and save. They're causing the chaos. They're causing the division that we have to overcome and be stronger. So it's just like we've got past lives when we were the bad guys. You know?
But what would happen if they tried?
Well, they're just going to try and stop us awakening. That's pretty much what they're going to do. I'm rather than going on to talk too much about it, but they're going to close us down. You know, you're probably what we've got to get to the point where our groups that we're forming. One of my friends asked, "Well, what do you want for the Sacred Network to be ending up with?" I said, "I want it to not be needed." Because we need groups that don't need us. We need to be able to communicate telepathically, because we're not going to have if we don't get wiped out by what's going on upstairs with the sun and everything, we won't have the electromagnetism for a while. But we need to continue. They always try to lock us down, not forming groups. You know. They don't want us in groups. Yeah.
Rory,
Sorry.
I have to stop you.
Sorry, yes.
So sorry.
No, thank you very much, yes.
I just think a huge round of applause for Rory.
Thank you.
Rory deserves a week of his own.